Today's Fairfolk Friday is a family story, and if we must name the individual fairy, it is the Puka of the Lahin. Long ago, before the Irish roads had potholes, there was a minor Irish lord whose banner was that of three white lions holding black spears. A marriage had been arranged for him, the daughter of a noble of equal standing from Donegal. A red-haired beauty accompanied by three raven-haired maids. The maids would walk in front of her as it was almost Christmas Eve, and there was a tradition at the time that if a redhead was the first of a group to enter a domain, that it was bad luck for the domain. Such superstitions can sometimes still exist, and did indeed in my family. Luckily for the couple, it was lust at first sight. However, of course, being two Christian nobles, they still held to certain ideals, including waiting until marriage. Especially as the raven-haired maidens would not leave their lady's side. The wedding was to happen on Christmas Eve. Preparations had already been made. Chefs were already cooking some parts of the feast, and decorations were thrown about. Lavish decorations, some made with real gold. And while the land occupied by the Lahines could be generously called a castle, it was little more than a fort, so it normally escaped the notice of many warring figures within the region. However, one creature was drawn to the gold in of itself, and that was a lone puka. This puka would take the shape of the wren, fly into the fortifications, and would steal all the gold it can find before a guard would see what was going on and would try to catch or maim the bird. However, as they often are, the puka was always just a little too quick. The married couple would hardly notice all of this is going on, for they were spending as much time together as they could, chaperoned as they were, and it was often said that the maids would discourage both of them for lewd comments at each other, unbefitting of their currently unmarried station. Comments of such a nature that I surely could not say them on this app. The eve was fast approaching, and the puka had much bounty, and finally, the married couple begin to notice that their extravagant expenses are being stolen. She or not, minor noble or not, a descendant of Nuada could not let such a act of pure mockery go unpunished. And so the minor noble summoned his cousins to devise a plan to go against this puka, as actively going against any fae had not been done in quite some time. They eventually decided to seek the help of a nearby elderly man, who in his youth was a Brehon, a keeper of ancient Irish laws and stories, serving a different role but not too dissimilar to druids and bards. Because of the man's advanced age, he was lame. His legs no longer functioned as they should, for it is hard to summon a man that cannot walk. The elderly man, surprised by such a noble coterie, asked his only daughter to get as much water and bread as they could, to, at the very least, be hospitable to guests that he could not afford to properly accommodate. The young noble wasted no time in asking about the puka, and this puka had apparently been a pest for centuries, and had even been a king among the puka. However, he could not keep his servants in line no matter how tyrannical he was, and so his she-mound was hollow, and so seeked to fill his mound with support befitting his station as a king, even if only a king of himself. However, befitting his station, he had certain protections, magical protections, and so could not be harmed except by a weapon that was made from rowan, specifically rowan made driftwood by the local river. The noble and his coterie left immediately to reach the river and to search it as well as he could. Of course, the river by this time was frozen over, so it was a question on whether we could truly call it driftwood. However, they didn't find a rowan hunk that was frozen in place and broke as much ice around it as they could, so it would drift at least a little bit before being collected and made into the fashion of an arming sword. However, this rowan arming sword was hastily made, had multiple imperfections, but time was running out. They got on their horses and raced to the fairy mound mentioned by the elderly man, and hoped that the puka was asleep, and they could simply grab as much as they could and leave. And of course, the luck of the Irish never fails. The puka of the Laheen was indeed awake. And obviously, the coterie would have to fight the puka. It unfortunately seemed to go nowhere for minutes, as none of the iron swords would pierce his skin, and even as they tried using some of the extra rowan from the driftwood at him, it didn't seem to affect him all that much. Until at one point, the puka reached out his arms as if to make some great proclamation of vicious mockery. He was struck in the back by the noble with the rowan sword. And as if by magic, he turned into mist, and the mist slowly reached out of the hill and seemed to join a much larger mist that was forming outside. Unfortunately, as they looked outside, they started to see the faintest hint of color on the horizon. The coterie grabbed everything they could, everything that would fit on the horses, and tried their best to race back into their home. The wedding arrangement had set a particular date, of which, if it was not to be honored, there would be much repercussions, including taking the red-haired lass away from the young noble. Such a thing would not do, but it is entirely possible that he was out of time. The young noble burst open the doors to the great hall, and to his own aghastment as well as to that of all of the attendees, which included much of the royal court of higher standing, he had returned with the decorations. The young noble looks ahead of him, and he sees both his bride-to-be and the priest smile as slowly the sun creeps into the hall windows. He had literally just made it just in time for the ceremony to begin. During his vows, the young noble boasts of his adventure and says that he will do so much more and travel so much farther for her. That night, they consummated their marriage and the continuation of his line as the noble court celebrated such a glorious event as during the celebration all of the decorations go up, everyone is drinking. And so the puka of the Laheen did not ruin among the greatest Christmas Eves of time.